Welcome to the Lost and Found podcast, and this is episode 1. I am your host, Sabri Gazail, and in this podcast, we're going to be having conversations with a whole array of different people where we're going to be exploring some of the lost meanings in spiritual teaching, ancient wisdom, philosophy, and religion to see how we can really use and apply it to modern day living to really enhance the experience of this thing we call life. Now, in episode 1, I'm having a conversation with Zack Blakeney, who is a consciousness coach and self-mastery coach. He was a former CrossFit competitor, powerlifter, bodybuilder, and bodybuilding coach. And he really shared some fantastic wisdom. It was actually the first time that we'd spoke, and I imagine it's not going to be the last. I really enjoyed the conversation with Zack. I really kind of resonated and felt like he would just be the kind of guy that I'd really get on with if we were to meet in a bar to grab a drink. So it was an absolute pleasure to have him here for the first one. I hope you enjoy this episode. Thanks so much for watching and enjoy. Brother Zack, thank you so much for doing this. This is the very first episode of the Lost and Found podcast, and it's an honor and a privilege to have you here. I'm really excited to have this conversation. So thanks again, man.
Hey, man, it's an honor to be on the very first episode of your podcast. And I really appreciate it when you reached out to me and, just felt the energetic connection, wanting to be here for you and to be here for your listeners as well.
Yeah, thanks so much, man. I mean, there's so much that I want to dive into, and there's actually some things that I'd seen after I'd asked you that I was like, oh, no way, that resonates. And I feel like there's so much. But one of the things that popped up that I hadn't realized is that you were a bodybuilder and also used to coach bodybuilding, which is obviously quite different to the consciousness coaching that you do now and the self-mastery. And we're going to dive into that. But I actually competed in bodybuilding about a decade ago. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, no way. Like, of course he also coached that and did bodybuilding. Makes complete sense. So, I mean, before we go back there, I mean, just right now, the consciousness coaching, the self-mastery, how long have you been doing that?
Well, we could say the actual coaching, probably the past 3 years. Even when I was a bodybuilding coach, I started to have my own awakening, so to speak. One of my intuitive gifts, just something that I couldn't explain to you why I'm good at it, I'm just good at it, is just understanding human behavior, understanding how human beings think, how they respond to stimulus, and pattern recognition. So that's just something I was always gifted with. And, I got my 2 degrees. I got a master's in education, bachelor's in education. So inside of that, I learned how to teach to an extent. I learned a lot about psychology and things like that, but it was always easy for me. So when I started doing bodybuilding, I was always a competitor. So, I was a 3-sport star in high school. I played college baseball. Once I got out of that, I found my fitness journey. I competed in CrossFit. Then I competed in powerlifting, and then I competed in bodybuilding. So, it's always been a competitive edge. But I remember, I was about a week out from my second show. And at that point, I was deep in porn addiction. I was addicted to porn for 16 years. I was addicted to drugs at that time pretty heavily. Bodybuilding, I was also doing steroids. So if you're willing to stick a needle in your butt, you're willing to also put things down your mouth without any sort of concern. But I remember I was, 5% body fat, looked in the mirror, hated who I was. It didn't matter what my external appearance looked like. It was how I still thought about myself and how I saw myself. So, I got a divorce when I was 30 from my ex-wife, who we had a business together, the bodybuilding business we had together. And the divorce was really the thing that kicked off my own self-discovery, coming into an awareness that the addiction that I had, the behaviors that I had around it, lying and manipulating, controlling, people pleasing, a fear of being alone. All of these things were things that I started to explore once I detangled the energy from the relationship. And again, I was always really good at picking out other people's patterns, but I was very unaware to my own. But by being able to do that, then I just turned all of my outward knowledge, so to speak, inward. And I had a very strong desire to learn what happened to me during addiction. So I started in the science realm, subconscious remapping, neurochemistry, neuroplasticity, really starting to understand those things. But I always felt like there was something missing. It was like these are all unsubstantial, meaning that science shifts all the time. New studies come out, new things, epigenetics, quantum physics, right? All these different things. It's always shifting. But I was missing something substantial. Well, on my spiritual journey, so to speak, I was raised Catholic. And then in college, I took all my world religions classes, and I became kind of agnostic. And then I went to atheism, and then really went back to agnostic. I really don't know. But it was that moment of realizing that I didn't have any substantial foundation to these unsubstantial tools, that something was missing. So that's what brought me into the depth of the possibility of God. Okay, well, what is it, right? What is God? What is God in the sense of what I've been told God is? And then what is God to me, or who is God to me, and how does that feel? So that kind of drove me into that. And again, now I'm, just to give it a timeline, because I jump timelines in a couple of different ways. I'm about 2 years into bodybuilding coaching that I'm doing independently, and built a very big team. I was one of the best coaches in the state, if not the country, IFBB pros, the whole nine. And the things I was learning about myself, about addiction, the things I was learning about myself with unworthiness and people pleasing and competition, I was noticing it show up in all of my clients. They're all having these mental problems. They're all having these emotional issues. And yeah, I can give them a plan, and I can, hold them accountable to working out and their diet and everything else. And it's great how much bodybuilding creates a good level of consistency and discipline. But I noticed that they were feeling the same way that I felt. That literally, I'm talking to competitors that are IFBB pros that are a week out from the show, be like, do I look okay? Am I ready? All the insecurities are popping up. And I'm like, you look great. Like, can you not see yourself in the mirror? But of course you can't, because I've been there before. So then I started implementing the things that I was doing for myself that had brought me so much healing. So visualization and meditation, and what we could call in the business world emotional intelligence, emotional regulation and self-awareness, and social intelligence, all these different things. I started implementing these things inside of my bodybuilding team, and the results that I was getting only increased. I was consistently getting people in the winner's circle, consistently putting up pros. And what was the X factor? It wasn't the diet. It wasn't the workouts. That's what everybody else does. It was actually moving into the emotional healing and the mindset space with them. So that's really what, then I saw those shifts and the transformation that was happening with them. And I was like, okay, well, bodybuilding as an industry is a very egotistically driven industry. Look at me, look at my body, look at this, and look how many of them are dying. Look how many people are not doing well with their mentality. Look at what the steroid use does, to the hormone regulation. It was just, I was like, I don't want to continue to try to impact an industry that has a container that's set up for not this type of impact. So then I took a risk. And I said, okay, well, who do I want to serve? Well, I want to serve leaders. I want to serve entrepreneurs. Well, what body of work shows that I'm worthy to do that? Well, nothing that I can really lean on, except for the fact that the bodybuilders that I was coaching, some of them were CEOs, some of them were entrepreneurs, there was no difference. So once I was able to detangle the imposter syndrome and just step out and start doing it, I just created the calling for what I wanted to do. And it's been a tough transition. It's not that it hasn't been easy. When I was a bodybuilding coach, my social media was netting me 20 to 25 leads a month. I had no problem growing that business. I grew that business to about $500,000 in revenue a year with deciding to switch. And when I decided to switch, I also had to switch my content, and then I stopped getting leads, right? And then I had to get more creative. Okay, well, how do I show up different? Well, I need to go out to different events and networking, and I need to show up differently in a different space so that people recognize me not as a bodybuilding coach, but as what I'm here to serve now, as consciousness and self-mastery. So that's kind of, story of the journey. I know all you asked me was like, how long ago did I start doing it? But I wanted to at least give some context to understanding what that is. And just know that it's a balance for me between constantly being a student. Like I said, I don't know what I don't know. And that keeps my egoic pride under control, I guess you can say.
Yeah.
So always wanting to learn, but then also really trusting the intuitive gifts that I have inside of me and knowing that whatever comes out of my mouth is perfect at the time.
That's amazing, man. Thank you so much for that. And really, it led to a lot of the questions that I was going to ask, which was how did you transition from bodybuilding into coaching this? And one of the things I did want to ask was, did you find that there was something that pushed you personally towards bodybuilding? Was that fear based? Was it something that you were always trying to move away from to like within bodybuilding? Or is that something that you more noticed amongst others and you were just kind of competitive and you went through different sports?
Mhm.
How did that play out for you?
It's just I call it a stepping stone. A lot of times our ego tricks us to believe that we're on a wrong path. And I always tell people there is no wrong or right path. There's just the path.
Hmm.
That path is a lot wider than you think it is, because you think the path is narrow. No, the path is really wide. And you're just bouncing off maybe the edge of this path, trying to find what it is that feels true to you. So the competitive nature brought me into it. My ex-wife was a IFBB figure pro, and my passion coming out of college was health and fitness,
Yeah.
and I didn't necessarily follow that passion immediately. I was like, what, I've been doing this. I've been competing in this way. I stopped competing in CrossFit just because I honestly, at a time, enjoyed it, but then it started to become so forced. So I knew it was time to leave there.
Yeah.
When I competed in powerlifting, I didn't do well with the 5-minute rest. So I was like, wait a second, like this is fun being strong, and also like I don't operate under, let me call upon intensity and then call upon rest. So really just like my preferred style of training, which bodybuilding is high intensity, not a lot of rest, heavy lifting, like that was flowing the endorphins for me. And then I pushed my ex-wife to compete and she did well. And then I got inspired by her. And I was like, you know what, maybe this is something I want to do as well.
Mm.
And then, when it came to coaching, I started with just like health and fitness with nutrition coaching, and bodybuilding came to me. I had 2 people in a gym say, hey, could you prep me for a show? And I was like, well, I've never done that before. I mean, I've dieted people. I've never done that before. Is that okay with you? And they said, yes. I was like, okay, cool. I give it a shot. That's how bodybuilding coaching happened. And then I did really well with it. And I was like, okay, I guess this is something I'm going to do now.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. For me personally, I uh, was always running away from. So I was a pretty chunky kid. I was not athletic. I had a 42-inch waist when I was 15.
Oh, wow.
And then when I was 23, I had a 50-inch chest and a 31-inch waist.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I remember, for me, one of my strongest kind of body parts was always my back. And I had a picture of me doing a back double bicep, and it was a few days pre-show. And I remember looking at it and thinking, there's too much. It's like there's like the tiniest bit of fat. Like, and when I say fat, let's be honest, what I mean is like just body tissue.
Yeah.
I like
Skin, water, something, right? That's
around,
hanging.
yeah, around my love handles. And I remember thinking, feeling self-conscious
Yeah.
about that.
Mm-hmm.
And now that was when I was 23. And it actually wasn't until I was 28 that I had a memory of my dad saying to me when I was a kid, and bless him, it's just levels of consciousness. He didn't know what the knock-on effect was going to be, but I had a friend and he said, why can't you be like your friend? He's not got any fat on him.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the feeling of almost being like,
Yeah.
like what's wrong with how I am? Why do I have to be like that?
Mm-hmm.
And I had that memory at 28. I'm 34 now. I had that memory at 28 and I bawled my eyes out like a child,
Mm-hmm.
remembering that. And it didn't matter what shape I got into, I could never escape the feeling of how I was at that moment in the present moment wasn't okay.
Yeah.
And it took some real undoing for me to, and actually one of my resolutions for January is actually to be more gentle with my body. And because I can be very, I mean, I actually really do enjoy fasting. And sometimes I'll do one meal a day. And if sometimes I'll, once a week I'll fast for 24 hours and once a month I'll fast for 48. And I actually really enjoy it. And for me, that's actually part of a spiritual practice as well.
Mhm.
But also on any other day, I'm quite strict with either time restricted feeding or intermittent fasting. And
Yeah.
this year, I actually feel like, you know what, I'm going to be a little more gentle and I'm going to flow a little bit more. And if it's 10:30 in the morning and I want to eat, I'm going to do it.
Mhm.
And just kind of being a little more gentle, actually reducing the amount that I lift. I actually tore something. I'm not sure what it is. The healthcare over here is not the best. And the doctor said, I'll refer you to physio. That was 8 weeks ago, but I was deadlifting and something really tore. And I've actually, this pec isn't attached to my, like it's torn at the, I did that
Oh.
about 7 years ago. I had some pretty bad ones actually, but about eight
Huh.
weeks ago I was deadlifting and this popped, and um, I just thought, you know what, maybe it's time to take a little more yoga and balance out the masculine and feminine, bring a little more yin to the yang. Um,
Yeah.
but it's so fascinating when we have these drivers and these things that we develop over a lifetime and eventually kind of ingrain within us and become part of our identity, and we might not actually know why we really want to do that thing, why that thing calls to us, or what part of us it's calling to. And
Mhm.
it's just so fascinating when you start to shine light on the shadows and you
Mhm.
go, holy shit, the entire time it's just because of like a simple, and you're hitting on something where you remember it and you start crying.
Mhm.
You hit the thing when it really releases some emotion. And I find that fascinating. And what you said about a lot of the pros and people that they can't see it, I wonder if there's something similar going on, and if that thing that seems very personal is actually very universal.
Yeah. Yeah, I like to say that all the time, that what's most personal is most universal. I mean, that is the connection of consciousness. Suffering feels the same for everyone. Our stories are what elicit the response of that. But ultimately, what you're discussing is discovering the cause of the effect. And that is really when we get into the type of work that I do with my clients. We make a distinction between self-help and what we call transformation. So self-help is a $13 billion industry that feeds off your need for more and more and more help. There's not value in self-help. This podcast it can be a form of self-help. It's information. Again, it's not that it's not valuable, but ultimately it doesn't work because it comes from a premise or a perception that you're broken, or that you don't have answers to the questions that you seek. And if you come from a perception that you're broken, then you're going to try and fix yourself. And all fixing does is reinforce that you're broken. And that is also a never-ending thing. Well, I'm broken, so I need to fix this. I'm broken, so I need to fix this. I'm broken. It's exhausting, it's tiring, and it's looking outside of yourself. Well, ultimately, these are all effects. Self-help is tools. And again, it's not that tools aren't valuable. But a hammer can't do anything without the causality of the human picking up the hammer and hammering the nail. So the tool does nothing. Transformation comes from the place of what we say is that first we have to come from recognizing our wholeness, that we are whole and complete in our state of being who we are. And that change is ultimately impossible inside of yourself. Because what you, again, try to change, you only reinforce that you're not whole. So coming from a perception of wholeness, you then start to see things a lot different. And transformation for us says that, look, until you discover the cause of your pain, and as long as you live in the world of effect, which you try and fix an effect with another effect, you're going to still experience the pain. So when we think about the ego, what we call like the walls are built around our perfection, so our wholeness. And the first wall is fear. So that then creates a belief. That belief then elicits a behavior. And then the ego then identifies with those beliefs and behaviors as being who you are. And this is a big victim loop, because inside of that, we're not aware of choices. We just say, I believe this thing, so this is what I do. And a lot of coaches work with behaviors and beliefs. And again, I've worked with plenty of guys and helped them heal from porn addiction. I tell them on the phone all the time, like, look, guys, I can put a porn blocker app on your phone for 90 days and you won't watch porn. But that's not going to prevent you from watching porn in the future. There's a cause to the reason why you're doing the thing. So this is the principle of cause and effect. It's a law of our universe that you cannot get around. So dealing with causes and doing the inner work to find the cause then is the choice point, which allows you to make a different choice for a different effect. But most people will not move through the resistance to understand what their cause is, because they don't want to. Because they don't want to admit that they're afraid. They don't want to admit they're afraid to be alone. They don't want to admit they're afraid that they're unworthy. They want to admit they're afraid that they're not capable. So once we do that, well, what do? We just prolong our feeling of being incapable and unworthy because we're not willing to face the cause.
Yeah.
So consciousness really is this. It is going into the deepest level, the initiate point, so to speak, of whatever effects you're experiencing, so you can transform that experience for making a different choice.
Yeah, beautifully put. I love that. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think sometimes when people get close to the cause, the feelings that can arise in the body, I think people are so used to dodging that feeling that as soon as it starts to arise, it's like nope, don't want any of that. Let's do something else. Where's that remote? Where's the porn? And it's so easy. I think people can so naturally, without realizing, just want to avoid that so much. And it almost goes against our natural, maybe it goes against our natural want for comfort, for seeking comfort, to actually lean into what is that discomfort? Why is that there? And of course, we know like that's the way that we either transcend it or we transmute it. We can use alchemy, whatever it is, or just to actually recognize, oh, that's where that came from. But it can be terrifying, and the ego wants to remain strong. It doesn't want to be broken down, and to see this is where this cause, this is what the cause was, right?
Yeah, so the ego really has two primary characteristics. One, it's identification. Right, so the awareness that I exist and I identify with my mind as an existence. And then two is separation, so that I'm a separate being from others, but it also creates the separation within yourself. So inside of you, you seemingly have, sometimes we can seemingly have 20 different voices telling us to do different things, but I always tell them, no, it's just two. You have one, which I call the inner guidance system, or what you could consider your spirit or your consciousness, that is consistent in the messages. It says, hey, you're worthy, you're capable, you're loved, you are courageous, you can do whatever you want to do. It's always saying the same thing. And then the ego responds, rebuttals in fear. No, you're not good enough to do that. You don't know enough information. You don't have enough experience. You remember last time you tried to do that thing, didn't work out too well, did it? All of the rationalizations. So there's one in the 20 voices, there's one voice, your inner guidance system, and then there's the ego that is constantly attempting to rationalize and negotiate with the inner guidance system. And for as long as we believe that our ego is who we are, the ego will win, and we'll be incarcerated by it. We'll be in prison, in our own prison that we've made for ourselves, without the awareness of understanding that there are two parts. So when you were talking about avoiding, what we like to say is what you avoid creates a void inside of you. When you look at the law of polarity, the principle of polarity, and you look at the yin and yang, if you look at the yin and yang symbol, there's the black-white, there's a black side, there's a white side, there's a little bit of black in the white, there's a little bit of white in the black. But then again, when you look at the silhouette of it, the silhouette is whole. So when we only want to focus on the white side, which we could say, let's say, is love, and we don't want to experience fear, we avoid feeling fear. Well, you're still experiencing fear. Just because you don't want to focus on the fear that you're experiencing doesn't mean that you're not experiencing fear. So when we avoid something, that's when we feel broken. We feel fractured, right? Because we don't want to say that we're fearful. We don't want to say that, we're not good enough. We don't want to say that we're incapable. But what I'm here to tell you is that you are both unworthy and infinitely worthy simultaneously. And if you look back at the yin and yang symbol, in between the two is a squiggly line of the outline of the white and black. And to me, that represents choice. That if I can recognize that I am both unworthy and worthy simultaneously, and I can accept both those possibilities in my consciousness, and I can observe both those possibilities as being a whole individual, then I can consciously choose which one I want to align to. And of course, if I'm going to consciously choose, I'm going to consciously choose worthiness, but it doesn't mean that I'm not accepting that I could be unworthy. It doesn't mean that I'm not avoiding it. Yeah, fear of unworthiness. Ooh, I feel that. Well, what's the other possibility? I'm also infinitely worthy. Okay, I choose that. Anybody who's doing this work or is sensitive to energy and vibrations, you will feel your vibration raise instantly. You will feel the uncomfortable feeling in your gut go away and you'll become lighter. This is your vibration increasing just through your power of choice. So, this is mental alchemy. This is turning lead into gold, so to speak, of what was. But really, lead is negative thoughts, scarcity, lack, whatever else, and gold is abundance and positive thoughts. And it's your ability to choose how you want to think.
I think so far we've definitely touched on at least 4 of the hermetic principles. Just
Yeah.
just in passing, we've had cause and effect. We've had what else have we had? Do we have duality? I think the duality was mentioned.
Polarity, right?
Yeah,
I could say if I went into God and God consciousness, that everything is connected. So we talk about the principle of mentalism. Everything is connected.
yeah. The all is
These,
the uh the all is mind. The universe is mental.
yeah,
That's the first principle, right?
yeah. It's the principle of mentalism, essentially saying that.
Yeah,
And these principles are again, they're foundational. They're inescapable.
yeah.
The only thing that is above these principles is the creator who created the principles. But inside of this universe that we find ourselves in, it's what we have to adhere to.
Absolutely.
So I call them the rules to the game. And the way I would say it is, Saab, man, if you've never played American football before, and I said, hey, bro, you're going to go out and play cornerback, and you have no idea what that is, you're going to go out, you're going to suck. You're going to learn through your experience, but, you're going to suck. But I said, hey, Saab, here's the rules to American football. And you study the rules. And I said, you're going to go play cornerback. Okay, well, you're going to know, okay, there's a wide receiver. He's going to try and catch a pass. I'm going to try and cover him. Like now you have some foundation, right, to understand how to play the game. So to me, the hermetic principles are just some of the rules to the game to win the game.
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't that long ago when I read the Kybalion.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was amazing. I actually first got into
Got it right here.
amazing. I love it, love it. I first got into uh, self-development or personal growth, and within the traditional industry of it. Actually, probably an unusually young age. I was 14, so 20 years ago, I started listening to uh, Robbins, Zig Ziglar, Deepak Chopra, Stephen Covey, just some of the kind of the classics and the OGs. And I got into to that realm then. And I think it's because I could just really, a couple of things. I could really sense that something wasn't quite quite right in me. And I was called to try to find answers as to what was going on. Another thing is I've always had a very strong intuition. And what I would maybe now I'm starting to open up to the possibility that maybe it's some psychic or at least very strong intuitive things that
Mm-hmm.
are going on. I notice now that very often if I speak to someone, I can feel in my body if they've got something going on in theirs.
Mm-hmm.
Just 2 days ago, I was having a conversation with someone, and I said, "This might sound weird, but I'm getting a feeling just here." I said, I don't think it's mine. I said, is there anything going on there for you? And she was like, oh my God, literally exactly there. I thought, yeah, I didn't think it was mine. Um, And so maybe there was always something that kind of called out to me about these types of learnings from a young age. And maybe it was past lives. Maybe it was, things going on there. But as I've moved through time and I've kind of gone from the very traditional kind of self-help to some of the more maybe esoteric or lesser known teachings, and maybe some things that we might call mysticism, and then coming across the Kabbalion. So much of that, when I read that, I was like, of course, that makes all the sense in the world. And it almost confirmed so much of what I feel to be true inside me. It wasn't like I was reading it going, wow, that's like doesn't make sense. It was like, yeah, I feel that in my body to be true.
Yeah.
It was a really wonderful book.
Yeah, so I have another book recommendation because this will be the first book that I ever read that is a spiritual nature. Essentially, what I said is that my intuition didn't reject it. It's called The Raw Contact, Teaching the Law of One.
Okay.
I'll probably send you the link on Instagram as well.
Yeah.
This is a channeled work, if you know about channeling. This is a trans-channeled work. So there's a difference between channeling, in which the person who is channeling is conscious, and then you're inviting another consciousness to speak through you, like Abraham Hicks. It's a similar type of person that does our Bashar. Trans-channeling is when the entity or the person leaves their body fully, and then the other consciousness comes into the body and operates inside of that body. And the consciousness that dropped in is an entity known as Ra. And they claim to be the same Ra from Egypt, and that they built the Egyptian pyramids. And what I call this book is a metaphysical dissertation on the universe, consciousness, energy, understanding why we are here. It gives you that answer to why we are here. Now, Ra says they're from the sixth density of consciousness experience, and that we're currently in the third density of consciousness. And actually, we're currently in fourth density consciousness. We're in a time of what's called harvest, a transition time from third to fourth density. And harvest can be described as being like the Christians will call it the rapture, the end of days, whatever else. It's not the end of days, it's just the end of a consciousness period. As we moved into fourth density consciousness in 2012 as a collective, but we still have a lot of third density conscious people on the planet because of the transition. So they say they come from this consciousness experience, and essentially they are of service to others, which means that they respect free will. So one of the reasons why I love the book is that they will not answer questions if it infringes on the questioner's free will or anybody else's free will. And that's what I found that was so incredible, because then I started to connect what I found wrong with, or no, I don't want to say wrong, what I was resistant to in religion, because being raised Catholic, there's not a respect of free will. And even more so, they use fear to try, and the fear of going to hell, going to some unfavorable afterlife, to attempt to align the person's behavior to love.
Yeah.
So I realized that I was like, oh, I'm trying to be forced to believe something, and I have no choice on what I believe. Well, this book, and it's actually 2 volumes, volume 1 and volume 2. So again, this is 109 different sessions that they did this from 1981 to 1984. If you had told me one time, I said, oh, maybe, but 109 different sessions. And anybody that listens to this book, that listens to this podcast and chooses to pick up the book, you're going to discover a lot of truth. And you're also going to experience a lot of cognitive dissonance simultaneously.
I am going to get that later on this evening. Zach, I'd like to share something with you that I have told a handful of people in my life, and I have never shared publicly. I kind of stopped using social media a couple of years ago. But one of my commitments to doing this podcast, I'd like to kind of, with this being the first episode, share with people that are listening. And as we grow, people will listen to the first one. And I definitely had some resistance doing this, but I also had a strong feeling inside me that I need to do this, that this is part of I've actually been told by a shaman that I'm like on my kind of chart, I have a siddhi, which is for speaking, a gift, and it's meant to be. And when I said about podcasts, and she said it sounds like, that's where I should be. I was also told that the next 25 to 30 years of my life, according to my astrological chart, would be in service to the divine or God, and would be aligned with that. And I always had a feeling of like, oh yeah, but like me, really? Can I do this? Can I? And I sat in nature recently, and I actually said out loud, God, what do you want from me? And the answer came up. The answer came from within. It wasn't here. It felt like it was somewhere else in my body where it arose. And I was like, yeah, I know. It was almost saying, you know what you're meant to be doing. Like, what what your purposes, what you align with. Um, so that's why I'm here. And part of my commitment to the podcast and everything that I do moving forwards is really being naked and being vulnerable, being honest, and absolutely not trying to position myself as someone with all the answers. And that's part of the reason of the Lost and Found, the name. Part of it is about looking at lost teachings and finding new things that we can kind of um, adopt or incorporate into modern living. But also part of it is me sharing my journey, going from completely lost to finding myself. And it's not to say that I am found, but it's this journey, and it's almost to invite other people along and to get involved in these conversations in this way where they can start to find things that they can add, and maybe in that process they start to find themselves. And so for me, this honest, authentic, let's put it all out there and like, hey, this is me. So
Mhm.
with that being said,
Yeah,
on
I love it,
the
man.
20th of November 2020, it was my daughter's fourth birthday. Her mum and I are not together. But we get on great, co-parent really well. Um, I had her in the morning. She'd slept with me the night before. I'd taken her to her mum's, and I decided just to go for a walk that I've been doing quite regularly throughout the lockdowns. And I went out and I decided, you know what, I'm going to go a different direction. And I turned right instead of left. And my gut had been a little sensitive. Around that time, I was in this pattern of overeating and not really controlling what I was putting in my mouth. And the night before, I actually was stood in the fridge getting like a spoon to get some dessert. And as I'm moving it towards my mouth, literally there was a voice in my head saying, "You don't need to have this. Don't do this." And my hand was still moving. And, and I just paused and went, "No, I'm not going to do it." And I left it. The following morning, did my daughter's breakfast. My mom and my brother came over, had that. But I decided actually, you know what? I'm not going to eat. I'm gonna sit this one out. And so I went for this walk, and I was thinking I might fast today. I might do 24 hours. And at this point, I wasn't fasting as part of a practice. And I thought I'm gonna fast. And then I'm walking. I'm thinking, yeah, maybe I'll do that every Sunday. Maybe that could be like a day of rest for my digestive system. And then I thought, day of rest. And then I started to think, why was that so important that it was put on a piece of, a tablet of stone? Why was that as important as effectively don't kill people? I get that one. But what about the day of rest? I'm just kind of thinking. And I ended up walking for about what was going to be a 20-minute walk. I ended up walking for about 7 miles and took a complete detour. And I just started really thinking about some of the teachings and from Christianity. And I'm not a Christian. I've never looked at a Bible. But for whatever reason, these thoughts were coming up. I then got home and I meditated for an hour, had a hot bath, and then I sat down, no phone around, just candlelight, and began to journal. And for the next 2 hours, um, I wrote things that were not my thoughts, and a lot of it was biblical. And there were passages from the Bible and that I hadn't read before. But what was really interesting was it was a lot of writing explaining how things that are taught now are completely misinterpreted. And there's a much richer depth to everything that Jesus spoke of and was actually pointing to and it was basically what he was actually pointing to,
Mhm.
and what God is and what heaven is and what hell is, and about these states of existence, and how ultimately the idea of the devil is just meant to be an archetype for the ego. And it was 2 hours of writing, and it wasn't just this understanding. I had this shift after where I've actually not eaten sugary food since that day. It just stopped. I began fasting effortlessly. At that point, I had an addiction to sex. In fact, I would say I had an addiction to a fuck boy lifestyle.
Mhm.
And um it's like all of the things that felt like strings on me, where I was a puppet and being controlled, seemed to just go. And I listened to the song Amazing Grace, and just tears just flowed down my face. And that feeling of I once was blind, but now I see, was lost, but now I'm found. That's the name of the podcast. Um, and it was just the most wild experience. And for 6 months, I kind of maintained this practice where every Sunday I'd fast for 24 hours. I would go for this long walk. Some days the same thing would happen where I would write, and it wasn't like it was me. Um, and then I actually strayed away. I was going to say strayed away from the path, but I like what you said. It's a wide path. I went to the other end of the path. I
Mhm.
went to the other side of the path where, in pursuit of, it was really during the crypto kind of boom. I was really heavily in that, and I kind of went across the path. And eventually, I found myself returning probably March of last year, where I just couldn't ignore it. It was coming up again, whatever it was, but there was just a deeper knowing within me that my path is meant to be aligned with something deeper and richer, and this spiritual path. And this is, and I have a tendency of going on these long-winded
You're good, brother. I'm enjoying every moment of it. It's your show.
monologues.
I'm,
but
I'm, I'm just a guest.
when you said about the channeling, I had no prior knowledge of that until I believe I had an experience of it. And as someone that hadn't really had awareness, and actually also I was very kind of closed off to the idea of like what I would call now, I mean, people would say this is spiritual, and actually I think now I would too, but for a long time I would call mystical and mysticism. I was really shut off to that, like, bullshit. And to have that experience after it, it was really quite like, okay, how do I make sense of what's just happened? What is that? And I would tell some of my friends, and I say, now listen, I know I sound crazy. I know. So let's just preface this. Sounds crazy. But this thing happened last night.
Mhm.
And so yeah, the channeling is very interesting. And that was the first time I kind of had any level of awareness. And of recent, and certainly this year, there's been too many magical things take place, miraculous things take place, which have really shattered my idea of what I believe to be possible. Where I have almost gone, oh, I know nothing. I thought I knew what was going on. I've got no idea.
Yeah. Well, that's a beautiful state to be in because it means that you're open, right? Open to the infinite possibilities of the creation from the creator. So, if you look at Jesus as a figure and when he was here, uh, it was all a matter of faith for him. It was his ability to stretch his belief system outside of what everybody else was telling him was possible, because he knew that to be the case. And a lot of Christians forget that Jesus taught his disciples how to do a lot of the miracles that Jesus performed. It wasn't just Jesus that was doing these miracles. There was a point, and just because I've read the Bible enough, I actually went back and read the Bible after moving into unity consciousness because I was like, oh, I have a different perception to read this from. But there's a point where the apostles are struggling to drive a sickness out of a boy, and they come back to Jesus. I think it's like Matthew 18:20. And they come back to Jesus and say, "Why can't we drive out the sickness?" And Jesus responds, "Because you have so little faith." He didn't say, "Because I'm the chosen one and you're not." He didn't say, "Because, I'm God playing human and you're not." He said, "Because you have so little faith." Every single thing that he preached centered around having faith. And to me, faith is the complete trust in something or someone without having to see it. And then when you put your faith out and you create that vibration, you're calling in an experience, then the experience comes in, then you can believe it. Because like, oh, I had faith that this is true. And then this came in and now I believe it to be true. And as you practice this way of faith and trust, and then see the correspondence of experiences that come into your life, then belief starts to be ingrained inside of you. And then it only reinforces this intuitive notion that I am the creator of my life. Oh, and then now I'm having experiences that show me that, oh, now I have more belief that I'm the creator, more the belief that I'm creator, more the belief that I'm creator. And then here comes the unity consciousness that says that essentially that you are the creator. You are God, but you're not God.
God with a
You're
little
God
G.
pretending to be a human being. Just like a fox is God pretending to be a fox, and trees are God pretending to be a tree. There's still this separation of the creator and the creation, but simultaneously, there is no separation. Just like you talked about this voice that seemingly came from inside of you that wasn't from your mind. Well, the creator's light is inside of every single one of us. And that's really where the religious trauma can be dissolved, because inside of religion, inside of Christianity, all they did was took Jesus and put him as the next Godhead and said that you can try and be like Jesus, but you're not Jesus. Where unity consciousness says, no, Jesus is me as well.
I am Jesus. Yeah.
I am Jesus, and
Just,
I am Buddha, and I am Muhammad, and I am myself, and I am the other 7 billion people on the planet.
Yeah. Yeah. And so whilst we're going down the rabbit holes, have you had any experience with plant medicines?
Yes, many. And I've had a lot of magical experiences that I keep to myself, not only on plant medicine, but outside of it, just because of it's definitely a keeping my ego under control, and also some people aren't ready.
Yeah.
But let me move into, I've done psilocybin hundreds of times. I've done Bufo, 5-MeO DMT 3 times. I'm actually going to have my first ayahuasca trip here in a couple of weeks. Yeah, and let me see, mescaline, I've acid, LSD. I've done plenty of psychedelics. And yes, there's value in psychedelics, absolutely. But all of my time using psychedelics, like doing ayahuasca this one time, I already know it's going to be the only time I do ayahuasca. Like my intuition is telling me, hey, you're going to go do this thing. And after that, there's no need. Because ultimately the mind still can become dependent or attached to the use of a psychedelic as getting an effect of what is desirable. And it's still a depowering effect. What I mean by this is that if psilocybin, as it does for me, opens up my consciousness to the remembrance that I'm one and that everything is connected. And also I've had incredibly healing experiences as it opens up my subconscious into my conscious and helps me move through things. If I say that, well, there's only one way I can experience that, and that's by taking psilocybin, then I'm depowering myself from realizing that I can experience that in presence.
Yes.
So we actually have, myself and my partner, we've crafted a 3-day transformation experience. It's a consciousness experience, but it's a transformation experience. Where we have elicited results, over 100% results, getting exactly what they want out of the experience, creating awakening, healing, and integration into 3 days, collapsing time on personal development, spiritual development, whatever we want to say. And our number one rule for the 3-day experiences is that you cannot use any mind-altering substances. Reason being is because we're creating the effect of realizing that you are divine without the need for this outside thing. And even more so, what we do inside of that container room, we don't do anything. We're just setting containers. Here's the container for you to for your free will to operate in, and you to discover yourself through these experiences. And they do so. And then they come out and they realize that they're that powerful.
The key was
They don't
always me.
need outside things. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. It sounds incredible. Part of the reason I asked is that I actually journeyed on Friday with ayahuasca.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was the 5th time that I've done it, but I haven't done it for almost 5 years. So I'd been a while without, and in that time, a lot of things had happened. A lot of things have happened. But yeah, just this Friday gone. So today we're filming this on a Thursday. So it was less than a week ago,
Mm.
and I think to your point that people can become reliant upon it. I believe part of the wonder and the beauty of these psychedelics and for me especially ayahuasca is that I feel like it gives you a glimpse into what is possible. And the message I get with ayahuasca, and when people refer to it as her and being motherly, there is something about it for me on Friday. It was like it was also on the full moon in Cancer, that we did it. And it was really was like a mother saying, "Welcome home, son." And it was very nurturing and very gentle. And it was almost this acknowledgement of you've been away for a while. And it was a very gentle onset. And it's almost like she said to me, "Are you ready? Should we should we get to the real shit?" And I said, "Yeah, okay, let's go." And then it was and we we went. We went to other realms. And for me, and I was explaining this to my partner, it was her first time experiencing it. I was saying that the magic is not in the experience at the moment, it's what unfolds after. It's not the 5, 6, 7, 8 hour experience where you're going to watch like a crazy movie. It's what starts to happen after that. It's how you integrate it after. And I feel it almost gives me a glimpse into a realm or into understandings and insights where it creates a knowing. Maybe it doesn't create a knowing within. Maybe it actually just highlights a knowing that was already there. Maybe that I just hadn't had sight on. And then after, one of the things it did for me was it took me to the realm where, and maybe you'd experience this in in Bufo or in just DMT, but that kind of realm where it feels like this is where we go in between incarnations. And that's what it was for me. And it actually allowed me to, I reconnected with my dad who passed away a few years ago, with his dad who I've never met, with both my grandmothers who have both passed. And it was this wild experience. It took me to the source of creation and as spirit. And it allowed me to experience this where it's created a knowing for me of where I'm truly from, and that I am universe, I am the mother, I am God, I am you, you are me. We are all the all. And it was such a comforting feeling. But what happened the next day was really interesting. A good friend of mine, he passed away a few years ago, and it would have been his 40th birthday on it was the Saturday, this was the day after. And I closed my eyes and I felt myself in that same realm as I was enduring the journey. And I felt such a strong connection with his spirit in that moment. And it it felt it felt beautiful. And and I think that can be one of the beauties of these plants, is that if we rely on them, like you said, that it's actually disempowering. But if we can almost use that as it almost pulls back the curtain and says, "Hey, like I know you've got this idea, but have a closer look." And I've found, and And I do believe people can get there without, but it is like a slingshot into that realm of like, oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. Bufo is a different experience from ayahuasca. Bufo is like a rocket ship, so to
Yeah.
speak. Like you pierce through the veil and you go straight to the what you could say is the realm that we go to in between incarnations or whatever else. You experience yourself as the love and the peace, the joy of what that is. My last Bufo experience was very interesting because I was in this realm, and then I felt the energy of judgment. So there's judgment this energy started to come up my heart, and then like I traced like doubt. It was like a judgment of myself, and then it was doubt, and then there was a story. And who knows how long it happens inside of there, but it didn't seem very long. And I asked my shamans afterwards how long it was, and they were like, it was like 5 seconds. Like, you look extremely lost and worried. I was like all that stuff, and then I caught it, and I was like, oh. And then I got back into that space of peace. But then the value that I took from that is I was like, oh, there's an energy to judgment, because it was coming over my heart. My heart was very open. This energy started closing over my heart. I was like, that's what it feels like. So I got in tune to that energy, and ultimately energy is everything, right? When we start seeing the world through the lens of energy, we start accessing new information because we've never seen it from that space. But it's always been valuable of what I've had. Like I said, psychedelics are very valuable. I wouldn't have done them so many times, right, if it wasn't the case. I just know that for me at this point, there's a drive now into presence. That consciousness, or a highly conscious person, is both simultaneously present and aware. There are people that can be very present. One of my friends is very present and his memory sucks. I was like, well, you're present, but you're not aware. And those are two different things. So again, the polarity or the duality of presence and awareness. Because really, when you look at the omnis that describe God, omnipresent, omniscient, what's the other one? Omniscient, omnipresent, all-knowing, all-powerful. Oh, omnipotent. If you cross-reference those three omnis to the present moment, you'll notice that that's where you are, all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-present. So us operating in a God-like state is us operating in the present moment and actively thinking about what we want to create for the future while simultaneously being in the present. You talked earlier about these emotions that come up in the body and everything else. I've got to the point now in my own journey that if an emotion is coming up and it's uncomfortable, or there's a thought that's coming up, my first knowledge is I said, oh, this is an old program. So I just move myself into observation. Let me observe what my body is doing. Let me observe what my thoughts are doing. Oh, okay, cool. So what do I choose? Oh, I'm experiencing scarcity, and there's scarce thoughts. Okay, cool. Alchemy. I can experience scarcity. And what's the other option? Abundance. I choose abundance and I move forward. So I work a lot with clients about subconscious remapping, and a lot of people really find a lot of value in inner child work. And I'm not going to say that it's not valuable, but I will say the inner child work doesn't work. Reason being is that I can go back and comfort my inner child, and I can find out the reasons why I experienced trauma and everything else, but the why doesn't do anything but comfort me to have the possibility of continuing to loop in my past trauma into my present. So what I like to ask people is at what point will your past trauma stop being an excuse for your present behavior? And answering the question why from my inner child does not create that movement. What creates that movement is making different choices in the present. This is subconscious remapping. So when these programs pop up, program, that's my opportunity to make a different choice. And as I make a different choice in the present repetitively, I now map a new program into my past. And then over time, the emotional response is no longer there. This is what I did for porn addiction. When I stopped watching porn for the first time, I went 90 days scot-free. When I wanted to watch porn, my entire body started to shake. It was so visceral.
Wow.
Now being 6 years removed from it, does my mind still say, hey, you could watch porn right now? Absolutely, but it just passes. There's no emotional attachment to it. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, okay, you're gone. All right, cool. Let me keep doing what I'm doing. So I like to tell people, I was like, Sab, man, you could have a thought right now that says you want to kill me. And you would think that that thought was so incredibly ridiculous and outside your value system that you'd probably just laugh at it. Oh, that's funny. But what if a thought comes in that says you're unworthy? Oh, okay. Well, now I'm attached to that. That feels real to me and everything else. Well, I'm here to tell you that the thought that says you're unworthy and the thought that you're going to kill me is the same thing. It's just a thought.
Mm-hmm.
It's your choice on what you want to attach to. So I do this because I like to create stark differences between people so that they understand and say that your unworthiness thought is just as ridiculous as you wanting to kill me.
Mm.
From my perspective, right? From your perspective, it's real. So what's the difference? Choice.
Yeah. And do you think there is any value in, you said the tracing things back to childhood doesn't work, but do you think there's any value in understanding that it came from there, if nothing else, to actually point out how redundant that belief is now? Because it's like, well, hang on, I am now a man in my mid-30s that doesn't have to be worried about if my dad thought I was in as good a shape as my friends. And for me personally, I found that shining light on some of those, it actually made me go, huh, that's where that came from. And there's almost the laugh of the big-bellied Buddha, which is like the realization, like, oh God, that's so ridiculous. And it almost makes it lighter to a degree of like, that's what that was.
Yes. So I want to make sure that I'm clear with the distinction. I do believe there's value in it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work to shift your present behavior. That's where people get confused.
Mm.
Because again, you could say to the story, you could say, oh, the reason why, and I'm not saying this is the truth, but a lot of people that would be overweight at some time would feel as if no matter what you look like in the mirror, you still kind of have the fat kid syndrome. I'm not saying that's you, but I've worked with a lot of people that are that way. And when they are that way, they can go back and say, oh, I ended up being overweight because my father said that thing to me.
Mm.
But still in their present moment saying, no, the reason why I can't see myself well is because my father said that thing to me. Well, you've done the work to understand why that's the case, but it doesn't work for you to not think that way anymore.
Mm.
So again, value, yes, because when we extract the lesson from an experience, we have the opportunity to make a new experience with a new choice, right? So that's where the value is. But again, there's one side, lesson, second side, new choice. That's where people struggle. This is knowledge action gap.
Yeah.
And then they get lost. What do I need to do? I need to do all these things, everything else. And I'm telling you right now, subconscious remapping is the most simple thing that your mind will say it's so simple, it's stupid, and it'll reject not doing it because they think it won't work, but it works. It's so simple. It's just the awareness and the consistency to do the thing that you need to do to remap it and to have some grace and some patience. And then over time, again, the remapping happens, and then you no longer think the things that you used to think.
Amazing. I love it. Brother, I'm aware of time. I don't know how you're doing for
I got about 20 minutes or so.
yeah,
It's up to you. You want to keep chopping it up? I'll keep chopping up with you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm loving this. I live for this. This is great. These are just all the things that I want to talk about to everyone that I meet, but I would be perceived as a lunatic.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you something. One of my mentors told me as I was going through my own time of thinking I was crazy. They said, if you're questioning your sanity, it means that you're sane, because insane people don't question their sanity.
I like that. I
Hope
like
that
that.
brings you some comfort.
Yeah, it's great. It's just such it's funny. I feel like on this kind of like path of spirituality or self-discovery, or whatever we want to kind of call it, it's just full of so many paradoxes where it's like it's so wild and complex yet so simple, and it feels like it's both at the exact same time.
Well, that's the healing of the paradox, is that it is both at the same time.
Mm.
So that's where unity consciousness, it solves all paradoxes. Right? Because if you just look at it and say, okay, the all is mind, the universe is mental, meaning the universe is one giant organism that we could say is that. Well, there's this organism or this universe comes in different hues, colors, personalities, choices, all these different things. So when we open ourselves up to that, then we start to realize that there really aren't any paradoxes in unity, because there's an answer to everything, because the answer is, well, because we're all one. The law of one talks about, the raw contact talks about, that we're actually in a choice point in third density. We have a choice whether we want to serve others or we want to serve ourselves. And from this point, the next densities of experience, 4, 5, and 6, split into service to self oriented and service to others oriented. And the service to self orientation was what we could consider negative entities or demons, that what we've interpreted, or the devil, what we've interpreted what that is. So yes, we have our own ego inside of us, which actually makes sense why in third density you have both the ego and the inner guidance system, because you have a choice between the two. And the ego wants to serve itself. The ego will manipulate and control and enslave. So you can think about the service of self as being a triangle, and at the top of the triangle is the one enslaving everybody underneath them. Or you can think about service to others as being a circle, where we're giving to each other the entire time, right? Now, I have a triangle behind me right now. It doesn't mean it's a bad shape. I'm just using that as an example of what that is. But with that being said, that's just a way to understand it, right? So we see the duality of the negative and positive forces on this planet right now. Any sort of elicit of control or enslavement is a negative-oriented thing to do. Any sort of thing that respects free will and wants to serve others is a positively oriented thing to do. So the reason I bring that up is that a lot of people would say, well, how could God be evil? Well, because God created evil so that he could also experience good. Even in the story of Lucifer, God created Lucifer, right? Which means that Lucifer is a portion of God, which means that a portion of God is quote unquote evil or negative. And without the experience of the negative, we don't have the experience of the positive.
Do you think it's actually the same thing?
What do you mean?
The thing that is like the darkness in us is actually our light.
Well, that's, yeah. So you either transform or transmit trauma, right? So transmitting is what a lot of people do. They avoid their darkness. They run away from their darkness, but their darkness is what's running all their self-sabotaging behavior. So it's not that it's not there, they just don't want it to be there, but it still shows up in their existence, right? But then when I move into the shadow, when I move into my trauma, I can transform it into light. That is the path of self-awareness to self-mastery.
Have you seen, here's a curveball, have you seen the film Moana?
I haven't.
You haven't? Okay. So it's a Disney film.
Okay.
And
love Disney films.
I've of course, having a now 6-year-old daughter, I've watched Moana at least 30 times. And it wasn't until recently it dawned on me what the entire story was around. And
wait, did you say Moana?
Yeah.
Oh, I've seen the Moana. Yeah, I've seen Moana.
Okay.
I misunderstood you.
Have you noticed at any point that Takar is, so there's Takar the lava monster, and then there's Tafiti, which is really the goddess that gives all life. Have you had the awareness yet that Takar is actually Moana's shadow, and that when she pauses and she recognizes and she says, she stops and she sees it and she says, I know who you are, who you truly are. And then they go head to head, and then she gives her the heart of Tafiti, which also happens to be green, the heart chakra color. And when she puts the heart, the love, into Takar, that she then turns into Tafiti.
Yeah.
And I'd seen that film maybe 30 times, and it was maybe a month ago. I went, hang on a minute. Takar is Moana's shadow.
Yeah, and just looking at it again from the yin and yang, which is a beautiful teacher. Inside of the black, there's that little white dot, which means that there's always the potential to choose love out of the fear, right? Yeah. And again, both sides, to the monster and Tahiti, both of them are the same entity. They're just two parts of the same whole.
Yeah. And I think what was amazing was just it was the heart that was needed. It was Moana's recognition of, wait, I see what you are. I see who you are, who you truly are.
Yeah.
And then there's that offering of the heart, of love. And then you see the switch from Takar to Tafiti. I just thought, and I actually really noticed that, because I'd experienced something very similar within my own shadow, where I really kind of caught it, and I managed to see really what it was, but then feel a deep sense of love around it and how it seemed to just transmute. It was like, and that, like, it was the acceptance and then the love of it, that seemed to make it just change
Yeah.
completely. And it felt like wound plus healing, or and healing potentially being love, wound plus love equals gift.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, porn addiction for me while I was in it was the worst thing ever. Drug addiction was the worst thing ever. Divorce was the worst thing ever. And then healing from it, I have so much gratitude for all those times at this point.
Mm.
My mind sometimes wants to elicit regret and say, oh, you could have did something different, you know. And I was like, well, I couldn't have did any different because it's what it did. So what did I learn from it? Well, I wouldn't be the person that I am today without that experience. And also, I wouldn't be able to help so many people or guide so many people inside of what I do now. Um, the intuitive gift plus my experience allows me to have a very strong BS meter, allows me to understand the human behavior, allows me to be able to ask the right questions to move people into causalities that they wouldn't normally move into. So without those experiences, I wouldn't be able to serve as well as I can now.
That's amazing, man. You know, and again, I'm just mindful of time, so we'll wrap up soon. But one of the things that I really do want to ask is, do you ever wonder why you have somewhat of an innate ability that seems to be built within you, like you said, that intuition, that thing that maybe seemingly was always there? Do you ever wonder why?
Um, I did until I found an answer inside of the raw contact. Um, yeah, I'll do my best to explain this. So Raw says that there are entities called wanderers. And wanderers are from higher density experiences where their home density is, whether it's fourth, fifth, or sixth. And they choose to reincarnate during times of harvest for planets. Also because their density is like a very intense time of suffering, which also is a very intense time of lessons to be learned. So if you need to learn more lessons to advance in your consciousness and higher densities of experience, you would actually go back to third density to acquire that lesson a lot faster than you would through the higher densities of experience. So when I heard about wanderers the first time when I was listening to the book, I get crown chills. So one of my intuitive things is like my crown will light up, and then chills will start here and they'll go down my spine. And it's just an intuitive knowing that I'm either connecting with somebody that is in some sort of importance, I guess you can say, or I'm in the right state. Well, so I heard this and the chills happen, and then I just start crying, just bawling, crying, and I'm in the middle of a car. And it was the first time I had ever felt like I was recognized as something deeper, right, than my name and who I was and what I do here on this planet. So then I basically accepted this as being a possibility. And as I accepted it being a possibility, more things started to populate in my remembering inside of myself. And then I've gotten to the point I don't talk about it very much because ultimately my purpose here is to guide others to raise their consciousness to be able to be harvested into fourth density service to others. Whether or not I'm a wanderer or not actually doesn't matter when it comes to the identification of such, because if I am that, I let my ego run with it, I would have some sort of importance over other people. So this is after doing a lot of work around this. But ultimately, that gave me a great answer to why. Why would I intuitively know some of these things? Why do I understand consciousness at a higher level? It would make sense that I'm, reincarnated on this planet from a higher density of experience to help with the harvest of this planet.
Yeah.
So that's what's true to me. And it stopped all the chatter. I don't ask the question anymore. Well, that's why I'm here.
Yeah, that makes sense, man. It makes sense. And it's amazing. I've loved this conversation. And
Me
I
too,
think
brother.
we absolutely have to do it again at some point.
Yeah,
Again,
please.
thank you so much for all of your time. Can you let people know where they can find you?
Yeah, so on pretty much all social media outlets, I'm at Zack Blakeney. Luckily, no one really has my name. You can check out the Conscious Creators Community. That's our free community that we have, which you can come in. I actually do free mindset calls every Monday. We have a lot of resources and tools, right, for use inside of there as well. And our goal is to build the largest, using law of one terminology, the largest fourth density service to others consciousness community on the planet. So this is just the beginning. And yeah, and then also if you want to check out my self-mastery program, it's www.unleashyourg.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much, brother. I truly, truly appreciate it. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been my honor, Saab. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. Have a great day.
You too.
Take care, man. All right, there it was. I really hope you enjoyed watching that podcast as much as I enjoyed having the conversation and recording it. Like I said, this is the very first one, and I really am excited to be embarking on this journey and having you here for the ride with me. It's been a long time coming for me, and I've had to overcome a few inner objections to actually be okay with putting myself out there in this kind of capacity, in this open and vulnerable way. But for me, that's a really important part of this podcast, is to show up in that way and just share my journey and have these conversations and just hope it can offer some value to anyone who's watching. Now, I know it wasn't quite perfect. And as I go along, I know I'm going to improve my ability to podcast and ask questions, and also how to edit and improve the audio quality. These are all things that I know are going to happen along the way, but I wanted to get started. And if you feel like there's anything in your life right now that you feel a calling for, that you feel a desire somewhere in your soul that you know you want to be doing it, but maybe there's some type of limiting belief or there's some friction holding you back, then I urge you to listen to the voice that's inside, that's calling you to do that thing, and to really start to consider just actually doing it. Don't worry about it being perfect, but just getting started. And right now, I offer coaching to help with these types of limiting beliefs and help people break through them. And this is personally something that I've done for many years. And although I didn't really talk about it in the podcast, I actually owned a martial arts school. I coached for 15 years. And the area that I specialized in really was the personal development and personal growth. And as I've gone along my personal journey, as you would have heard in this podcast, I've really gone a lot deeper into what are some of the things that were holding me back on a much deeper level. And these are the types of things that I offer in coaching. And also in the next week, if you're watching this a week after it came out, which the chances are you probably are, I'm just launching the Self-Discovery School, which is selfdiscoveryschool.com, which is a membership platform that you can try out for 7 days for free. You can come try it out. And in there, there's going to be different contents on all areas of life. But the main thing is how you can show up as the best version of who you are. And that might be to your career, to your business, to your partner, to your children, to any of your family. But ultimately, it's to the world. How can you show up as the best version of who you are? And part of that platform is, again, is me sharing my journey, not as the person with all of the answers, but as someone who has been on a pretty wild ride and experienced a very wide spectrum of experiences, really kind of going from one end to the other, what I've learned in the journey, but also what I learned when I got to the place where I thought I wanted to be, to maybe realize that my ladder was against the wrong wall. So part of my commitment to the platform and to how I show up is just being very honest and authentic about that, because I honestly believe that's one of our biggest roads to freedom, is just seeing who we are in our entirety and being willing to share that. And when we do that, there's going to be certain people that just resonate, and they don't resonate with a false version of ourselves. It's really the cloak. If we can try and bring our truest self to the table, to the world, then you never have to try. It's not something that you have to keep up. And there's going to be a certain number of people that resonate. And again, if there's anything that you feel like you're wanting to do, that you feel called to do, and there's something holding you back, then I encourage you to reach out. Lost_found wisdom on Instagram, or the selfdiscoveryschool.com. So selfdiscoveryschool.com, and come and try it out for free. join the community that I'm going to be building. And yeah, you know, it would be my honor to have you there. So thanks once again so much for watching this first episode. And it's only going to get better from here. And I think this conversation with Zack was an amazing way to get started. And I thank him, you know, so much for doing the first one. And there can never be another first. So yeah, that's it from me. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you're having an amazing day, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.